Okay, so I want to begin today where we left off. And it will be in verse 3, in chapter 3, I'm sorry. What advantage then, I just read that, much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God. In other words, the Jews got the oracles of God, but they didn't do anything with it. And they were proud of that. For what if some, and this is where he starts asking the questions with that Socratic method of teaching. For what if some did not believe? If they didn't believe, shall their unbelief make the faith of God no effect? In other words, he's saying here, well, what about people that don't believe? Does that mean God has no effect? And he says many times throughout this Socratic asked and answered questions, he says, God forbid, let it not be. Let God be true and every man a liar. Just because you don't have faith does not mean that God's law is not true. Let God be true and every man a liar. Thou art the mightiest. Can the mightiest be justified in their sayings, and the mightiest overcome when they are judged? In other words, even the mightiest people, the most influential people, can never, ever overcome how they're going to be judged, because they're going to be judged by the law of God, and no one can keep it. We've just read that. But if our righteousness commend the righteousness of God, what will we say? Is God unrighteousness who takes vengeance? He's saying, as a man, I'm saying, if we're unrighteousness and so many people are unrighteous, then is God righteous by taking vengeance on all of us? And he says, God forbid. For then how would God judge the world? If there are not a set of rules that tells us that this is righteousness and this is unrighteousness, how would God judge the world? By our looks, by the color of our skin, by our intelligence? He can't. He has to have a standard, and the standard is his law, which no man can keep. In other words, we're going to get to this, no man is righteous. Case closed. For if the truth of God have more abounded through my lie unto his glory, why yet am I also judged as a sinner? Again, another question asked. If God's truth is abounded when I lie, then why am I judged as a sinner? In other words, what Paul is trying to say through a lot of this and in other books, he's saying there's a set of rules that God has, and I break them, I get judged. But guess what? If I didn't break them, then what good would they be? And it's insane what the people thought. They really, really thought that they were keeping the law, number one. And we read in James that if you broke one law, you broke the whole law. We read that last week. So these people are just trying to justify themselves. That's all they want to do. The godless people, the moralists especially, and especially the Jews. We have the law. God gave it to us. He didn't give it to the Gentiles. He didn't give it to the Greeks. He gave it to us. Aren't we special? And God's saying, no, there's nothing you can do. Whether you try to keep the law, whether you break the law, and there's even one place that says, if God has such mercy and grace, then why don't we sin more so we get more mercy and grace? How absurd is that? But this is the mind of these men, because they're corrupt. They're just corrupt. And everybody wants to think they're okay. Remember back in the 70s, there was a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay? Anybody remember? I know I'm old. Do you ever get your hand on that book? Read it. It was the beginning of this man-centered philosophy that we are in control. We, no matter what we do, we're okay. You're okay. Okay, so verse 8, and not rather as we be slanderously reported, and as some affirm that we say, let us do evil. I just read this, or I just told you about this. Let us do evil that good may come. In other words, let's just keep being bad so God can show us his goodness. Isn't that lovely? Whose damnation is just? What then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise. For we have before proved both Jews and Gentiles that they are all under sin. And here is the key to these verses. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. That's from Habakkuk in the Old Testament. There is none that understands. There is none that seeks after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good. No, not one. So this is his thesis. This is his Socratic method of asking questions and answering them. Why? I want to go out, and I do want to share the screen here on this, because I want you to see, I think this is it. I want you to see just what this is a masterful way of Paul. And remember, he's highly educated. So he is condemning the world in these first 12 verses. He's using the Socratic method. It's a form of cooperative argument, dialogue between individuals. It's based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and to draw out ideas and underlying presuppositions. We use this today. We use this in college. We use this in the courtroom. Parents can use it with their children. And I used it in my classroom. It is anything that allows someone to think more deeply. Let's read this next that I wrote here. Socrates used this method 500 years earlier to expose contradictions. You know, Socrates was a Greek philosopher. And under him was Plato, Aristotle. They all studied under Socrates. So all the most intelligent people with the Greek minds back in the day started with Socrates. He used this method of questioning, now listen carefully, to encourage people to question things that they were told and to look beyond the obvious. Think about that today. Should we be using the Socratic method as we watch the news, the CNN, the MSNBC, the mainstream media, as we read the Washington Post or the New York Times or Time Magazine? Whatever we look at, we should be asking and answering questions. Otherwise, we just read, listen, don't question, and we don't go beyond the obvious. For the last 2 years, we've been told all kinds of things. And a lot of people are thinking, and a lot of people are just listening. You need to be the thinker. And Paul encourages this of these believers. He's writing to believers, but they're confused believers. Are we a Jew? Are we a Gentile? Should we be circumcised? Do we have to follow the law? If we don't follow the law, we get more grace. I mean, he's asking a lot of things to give them thought-provoking questions so that when they lie their head down on the bed at night, these things are running through their mind, and it's making them question what they see and what they're told, and it makes them seek the Lord. Okay, so that's the whole purpose in the way Paul does this. And I believe there's about 61 questions that he asks within this book. Here's some of the questions. What advantage has the Jew? What's the profit of circumcision? For what if some did not believe? Is there unbelief? Does it make the faith of God useless? Is God unrighteous if he takes vengeance? If not, then how would he judge the world? If the truth of God has more abound through my lie until his glory, then why am I going to be judged as a sinner? If God can be more glorified in my sin, that's what this is saying. Hey, God's glorified in your sin because his truth will always, his truth will always trump your sin. Then why do you have to judge me? I'm doing what God needs me to do. Should we do evil that good may abound? And the verdict is Not one is righteous. No, not one. There is none that understands. There is none that seeks after God. So, as we just read, the world, the people of the world, all those three groups are all guilty. I want to go on. This little screen here says a little bit of it, but we want to read it in verse 13. Follow along. Their throat is an open sepulcher. A sepulcher is like a tomb. Their throat, and what's in a tomb? Dead stuff, stinks. With their tongues, they have used deceit. The poison of asps, that was a snake, poison snake, is under their lips, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. Now let's stop there. So in these next few verses, we are looking at the world, the men of the world, men and women of the world, and we're looking at three things, and we'll wrap it up with the fourth. The first thing is, what is man? What is he? And the second is what he says. And the third is what he does. That's what we're going to look at next. And then we're going to look at the source of all of this evil. So the first one, and I should have told you that a minute ago because we already looked at that in verses 10 to 12. That was what they are. It's none are righteous. They don't look after God. They don't seek good. They're unprofitable. They go out of the way to not know God. So that's who they are. Now, the next thing we want to see is what they say. And that's what I just read. Their throat is open, sepulcher, quiet phone. And all those things about what comes out of their mouth, poison, deceit, lies. Their tongues are evil. We know in the book of James, it says the tongue is the smallest member, but it lights a fire. The tongue is so damaging. I know in my life, my tongue is a problem. My tongue is a problem. I'm the first one to admit I don't follow after sins of the rest of my body. Never did. It's a bad thing right here. It's this. I don't have really bad thoughts. I've never taken my body to bars and, you know, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I mean, I can say all these things the rest of my body doesn't do, but I cannot justify the things that come out of my mouth when I'm angry. When I get angry, I get mad and I will say something, not to people on the street, but you know where that happens. You have the most liberty in your home to say it to the person that you love the most. You know who I'm talking about, Mr. out there. Okay, so let's say we have a little argument, you know. I will say things I shouldn't say. He doesn't. He does body language. This is true confessions. He does body language. He rolls his eyes, shrugs his shoulders, you know, and I go, blah, 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 blah. So you see how we're using our body to disregard the other person? We need to watch these things. It doesn't talk about body language here, but I think body language is part of it as well. So we have to be careful, especially with our children. Don't roll your eyes at your kids. Don't shrug your shoulders. Don't dismiss them and walk away from them. And by all means, don't say nasty things to your kids because this is what they're going to take into their person. So we can learn a whole lot about ourselves, the way we act in our home. We wouldn't act like that in the job. We wouldn't act like that in the marketplace. But in our home, that's where we see our true nature. We have to be careful. And if you see it in your home and you recognize it and you repent, then you have a true vision of what you are, according to Paul. Otherwise, if you're the perfect person in the marketplace or at work or with your friends or out to lunch, whatever, and you're just so wonderful, you can't judge yourself that way because as Paul said, or as James wrote, if you err in one place, you've broken the whole law. So if you err in one place, and that's why I encourage you to see how you're behaving in your home. If you are looking at the way you behave in your home, then you are probably seeing your true self. And therefore, you know exactly where God needs to work on the rough spots. As Christians, we don't have to worry about damnation because of that, but we want to be more like Jesus. And if you can do it in your home, you probably have conquered your biggest challenge. Okay, the next thing is 15. The next thing is what the people do. And this one says, their feet are swift to shed blood. Destruction and misery are in their ways, and the way of peace they have not known. Okay, their feet are swift to shed blood. Again, I'm going to James, because I don't think we need to look at this and say, well, this is talking about murderers. No, because in the book of James and elsewhere in the New Testament, even Jesus himself said that if you hate someone, you've committed murder. You see, that's the true law. So we can't just say, oh, these are people that murder. I'm going to dismiss that one because I would never murder anybody. But guess what? We murder people again with our words. We murder people with our attitudes. We murder people with the hateful thoughts that we can have. So this is just proof that we are no good. We can't be justified. There's nothing good about us. There's nothing. We cannot justify our behavior. There's nothing. We need Jesus. The next thing, let me say about the words. Do you know, and I was talking to my friend about this the other day, and I've studied the Mein Kampf and Hitler and all that stuff. Hitler was an orator. They loved him. His words were sweet like honey. He even quoted the Bible, and he said that he was doing God's will. This is Hitler that committed the crime of genocide of 6 million Jews. That his words, they were like the asp, you know, the asp in the lips and the deceit and the poison. And the people didn't discern it. They elected him chancellor. Do you know any other politicians that were real smooth talkers and able to swoon the people? We have to be careful what we listen to. We really, really do. Because Hitler swooned the people. In Revelation 13, we're going to read when we study back there that the, don't worry about that. Sit down. My dog's bark. Oh, okay. So anyway, it says that the beast will have arrogant words and blasphemies. His mouth is sinful. Death and life is in the power of the tongue. So the things we say, the things we do, the way we behave, our body language, all of this stuff is being addressed here. And then finally, we see in verse 18, there is no fear of God before their eyes. They have no fear of God. And I can say that of the godless people because we know God said he turned them over to a reprobate mind. He turned them over to the lusts of their flesh. He turned them over because he said, you know, if you're not going to listen to me, if you're not going to know me, if you're not going to look at nature, you're not going to recognize that I'm the creator. If you're not going to want to know me, I'll turn you over. And that's what he's done. And then that's the godless people. They have no fear of God. They are their own God. Hi, baby. And then the next group was the moralists. And the moralists, they have their own sets of rules. So God's rule, you know, I do most of that stuff, that I live the way my conscience tells me. They have no fear of God. And even the Jews, when they continue to break the law of Moses and manipulate it and circumvent it and say, oh, I've kept the law. I kept the law. Let me tell you, I don't know, I tell this a lot, and I might have said it to you, but on the Sabbath, they were only allowed to walk so many furlongs. It said in Deuteronomy, it says, from their home or their possessions. So they would wear 3 coats. They'd walk so many furlongs, drop their coat, and walk more, and then drop the outer cloak, and they didn't break the law. Loopholes, and they were okay in their own mind. no fear of God. So you see, it says they have no fear of God. If I knew that the spirit of that law was to only walk so far from my home or my possessions, and I dropped my possessions on the way and thought, oh, I'm getting away with this, I'm going 4 times the steps I can take. No conscience, no fear of God. That's what the world is full of. In verse 19, and this is so beautiful. Now, the word now, because of everything that he said in the last 2 chapters and a half, condemning 3 kinds of people and now condemning the world, he says, now we know that what things soever the law says, it says to them who are under the law, and every mouth may be stopped, and all the world may become guilty before God. Now we know that whatever things the law says, I'm under them. And verse 20, we read this last week. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. Paul says to the Galatians, because they were having trouble with the law, they were fighting like, you know what, these Gentile believers should go get circumcised. That's the law. But that was a Jewish mindset. They were so used to circumcision as an outward sign of their belief and their religion, that when somebody came into Christianity that was a Gentile, they said, you need to be circumcised. And Paul's saying, who's bewitched you? He said that word, who has bewitched you? You know that Christ saved you from the law and the works of the flesh. Why are you going back to it? And why are you making those people adopt something they never were given? You see? So everybody wants, in religion, everybody wants to set up a set of rules. And if you follow them, you're religious. And if you don't, I'm going to judge you. So let's look at some religion. And Robin, I may ask you on a few things like the Catholics. The Catholic.
Yeah, ask me any question about Islam.
He's a former Muslim, so he knows the laws of the Muslim faith. I'm going to mention some things that are more familiar to us as Catholics. If you recall, years ago, 20 years ago, Catholics weren't allowed to eat meat on Friday. Now they can. 20 years ago, Catholics had to go to confession on Friday night, Saturday, in order to take the Holy Communion on Sunday. They had to confess to a priest. Carol and I have been in cathedrals all over Italy. The confessionals are closed. Nobody is confessing because they don't have to anymore. Their laws changed. God says, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever. How can they change their laws and then judge people by them when they continuously change? So we know that. And then if you think about some evangelical churches, Carol and I and Susie were all in a church where the pastor judged you if you smoked. Okay? Smoking, you can be a Christian and smoke. It's not the healthiest thing to do, but if you've got that addiction and you haven't allowed God to take it from you, and it doesn't mean you're less of a Christian. Smoking is a sin against your body, but you're not going to go to hell because you smoke. But sometimes, even in evangelicals and in Nazarene churches and holiness churches, Assembly of Gods and things like that, they're going to judge you based on your behavior that doesn't look just right. Now, you share a couple rules, laws in the Muslim faith that are definitely man-made, that have nothing to do with serving God. Robin.
Yeah, let me go outside so I can speak.
You can't, don't worry about it. No. I put you on a spot and you're in a waiting room. Don't worry about it.
No, I do want to speak. So what was your question? Because it kind of froze for a little bit.
If I'm just thinking in the Muslim faith, since you were a student of the Quran, are there any rules of the Muslim faith that are definitely not of God that you had to keep as a Muslim? I know some, but I thought maybe you would want to share some. Any rules?
I mean,
Well, go ahead.
within the Muslim like scholarship and body, one of the mass problems there is that there's such an emphasis on the exterior and the works. Like basically, people have taken on a very literal, like letter of the law versus like the spirit of the law
Yes.
approach. So there is this aspect of like people really favor who memorize more Quran, who performs the 5 daily prayers. People judge you like, hey, you're not fasting. You have to, you know, do certain things to make up for it. And this concept of you have a unique personal relationship of God, even though there are traditions and angles and perspectives, it just isn't emphasized.
Yes.
You know, like that. There is it's basically like how Paul is saying, hey, you know, you're missing the point here.
Yes.
You're missing what Jesus Christ's message was all about. You know, it's very, I see a lot of parallels between the Pharisees and I'm not saying everybody's like that in today, but that's mass. You've been to the Muslim world, you've been overseas. Majority of the mosque in America, except for a few that are more modern or have a more maybe of a Sufi ideology. No, do you know what Sufism is? Have you heard that term, like tasawwuf for Sufism? Have you heard of that?
Mm.
Okay, so most Muslims, they do take on that very literal judging attitude, you know.
Mm-hmm. So in other words,
Yeah.
what he has just told us is that if you parallel them, it's nothing different than what Catholicism does or what evangelical Christians do, what anybody else that has a set of external, you heard him say it's the external laws.
Yeah, like for
And
example,
there's a blower
for example,
outside. You probably hear that. It'll be gone in a minute. So we have to say that all religions, every religion, if I had a Buddhist here, if I had a Mormon here, everybody would give us examples of laws that they have to keep in their church, in their group, in order to be totally accepted. And when they don't, they're judged.
Like Christianity, for example, I feel that there is a mechanism of permeability, transcendence, changing to the times, you know. Like for example, if a religion is judging you by your 5 daily prayers and how much fasting you do and all these things, right? What if I have like severe ADHD brain, autistic brain that doesn't fit into the demands of modern day society? Like one aspect I see within the Muslim community is a lot of childhood trauma that is going unresolved because there's a lack of understanding, you know, of the uniqueness, whereas within the Christian community, it's not so set in stone. You know, it transcends, and that's why there's this concept of adaptability that I see that you don't see within the Muslim community. It's very like in the dark ages. It doesn't mean you can't find beauty, and it's just that's how the modern day, like when you think of religion, it's just a modern day practice of it, you know.
Let me unmute me. Okay, I try to mute that so you wouldn't hear the lawn people working outside. Anyway, so I like that perspective, and I think those of you that didn't understand all of that, now that you hear that from the Muslim perspective, it's no different than any other religion, whether you're following Jewish sets of laws, Catholic sets of laws, evangelical sets of laws, Baptist, it doesn't matter. We can't do it. We cannot do it. It doesn't matter how many laws man makes in his traditions, and the Pharisees were doing the same thing, as I explained. I think I don't know if anybody missed this, but at the time of the Babylonian exile, when they were exiled for 70 years because they didn't keep the Sabbath of the land, when they came out and they came back into Israel, back into Jerusalem, they said, look, we can never get exiled again We got to get a group of people that will keep us under the law and make sure we don't break it. And that's when the Pharisees came into existence. And now they're rewriting the law and making sure that these extra things are in there so you can't bear to break the law, because God forbid they ever go into exile again. And that was futility on their part to try to add things to the law so that you don't break it, like adding, well, you can go this far and then drop this and drop this and drop this, and then you'll never break the law. And it was just stupid futility. It was man-made, just like the Muslims, like the Mormons. We can't serve God that way. There is no way. Welcome, Sonny. So we can't. So it says in verse 20, therefore, by the deeds of the law, whether it be Muslim, Buddha, Mormon, evangelical, Catholic, Baptist, doesn't matter. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Next week, this is a short lesson today. Next week, look at the next word in verse 21. I love this 3-letter word, but. So we're told the bad news. Did you ever have anyone say, okay, I'll tell you the bad news and then the good news? Okay. I tell you the bad news, but this is the good news. And the good news starts in this next verse. Because up until now, we have not heard anything about the love of God. And this begins the beautiful things of the love of God. But I'll give you a teaser. But now the righteousness of God without the law is manifested. The righteousness without the law, being witnessed by the law and the prophet, even the righteousness of God, which is by faith in Jesus Christ, unto all and upon all of them that believe. What a beautiful message now, that it doesn't matter what your law is, forget about it. God's righteousness is outside the law, and it's to everyone that believes in Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter who you are. So this wraps up our first lesson, and I want to ask some questions now. I'm not Paul. I'm not doing a Socratic method.
Yeah.
But I do have some things that I want to mention, and I want you to help me wrap this up. One thing I want to do, let me see if I have time. Oh, I do have time. Hold on. I'm going to share the screen one more, and we're going to wrap one thing up. We're going to just do a quick review. This one right here. So let's look at this very quickly. And we see, this is a good chart, and it's in your notes. So you have this to refer to later. These are the things that the Gentiles did, what the moralists did, what the Gentiles are the ungodly people, what the moralists did, what the Jews did, and what the world did. So they do their best to not believe in God and want no accountability. They render his signs and creation as nothing. They suppress the truth of God as a creator and make up fables to explain nature. They worship the earth and want to protect her above all else. Oh my gosh. And they disregard God's plan and design and lust after unnatural things. And what does God do? He says they are already condemned and he will give them over to their own ways. He says it 3 times. The moralists, they seem to have a conscience and know right from wrong. They believe they are right and others are wrong, so they judge. They violate these laws and they judge others that do the same. And God says they are inexcusable because they have an internal guide that they disregard. And the Jews, they have and know the law of God. They have been given the oracles. They are circumcised, but they rest in that ritual. Paul wrote that. He says, you rest in the law. You rest in your circumcision. They are born into the Jewish family and are sons of Abraham, and therefore they think that they're righteous. They follow customs and feasts and other Jewish traditions, and they have arguments that are not valid according to God. And God says, you arrogantly trust your religion, but your hearts need to be circumcised. And finally, the world. It says that none of them are good, doing good. Their mouths are poison, their feet shed blood, they have no fear of God. And God says, all the world is guilty. And he is judge and jury. The world is guilty. And if the world is guilty, then we have to have an answer. We have to have an answer, and that is the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so Paul has set out in the first chapter 1, 2, and 3 so far, outside of his salutation and greeting, and saying, I want to come and visit you as soon as I can. Other than that, he immediately starts into placing the guilt on those three groups and therefore on the whole world. So now we know there's none righteous. And now we can set the stage for the gospel of Jesus. So let me ask you a couple of questions and you can answer as you feel. You can unmute and answer. What do you think the main takeaway of these three lessons have been? In your own words.
No one's worthy. No one is worthy.
No one. And God is just. Yes, no one. Any other takeaway? Keeping the law isn't going to help you at all, right? It only helps you. It doesn't help you with your relationship with God. And you know, I think I shared this with you whenever I was in Portugal and I took my tracts with me. And when I was saying goodbye to the doorman that helped me so much that week with my homeless work that I was doing. And I said to him, Nuno, if I don't see you again here in São Miguel, will I see you in heaven? And he said, oh, yes, Miss Kathy, I'm a good man. I think I'm a very good man. You see, right there. And I said, Christos, solo Christos, Jesus alone. And I gave him the tracts. I said, share these with your beautiful wife, because she helped me too. And I said, and then I gave a 20 minutes. We talked about being justified through the blood of Jesus Christ. And his eyes were like this. So this is pretty much, you know, I asked my dad once and he said, I've never cheated on your mother and I don't cheat on my income. I said, Daddy, that doesn't help you go to heaven. Don't cheat on mom. Don't cheat on your income tax. Be a good worker. Help people at work. He was an HR director at a steel mill and everybody loved him. In his own sight, he was justified. When we go out to our neighborhood, people mostly think like that. They're justified in their own sight. They judge themselves against their moral conscience. Doesn't work. This has proven that to us.
Hey, Kathy.
Yes.
Oh, can I add something?
Sure.
I was first of all, I feel like the book of Romans, what you have taught, like Paul provides like a moral compass. And what you mentioned earlier about the educated moralist, like at the end of the day, God is our maker, God is our creator. And what came to my mind is like, for example, like you said, hey, I'm a good person, you know, I'm good, I'm doing the right things. But what that doesn't prepare you for, and I want to connect what you taught me in the Epistle of James, is like, what if the boat is rocky? Mm-hmm. Like, what if there's a turbulence? What if you have all these calamities and tragedies? And that reminded me of a book we read in high school called The Heart of Darkness. Like, people might think they're good, but what if the environment, everything around us changes? Then exactly. What? Mm-hmm. That's the scary part, because at the end of the day, through our faith, we know what the ending is.
Yes.
But if you don't have that, you're doing it without like this clear end goal in sight, and you're putting so much reliance on yourself and trusting yourself that, hey, I'm gonna be a good person till death. And that's a very risky, scary thing when you think long term, you know?
Absolutely. Listen to this guy. He was just baptized last year, May, right?
It was in May at Bridge City, yeah.
Just May, just a new convert from Muslim to Christianity, okay? Listen, do you see the wisdom God has given him? He asked me, what should I read? And I said, read the book of James. And he studied the book of James. And I think that's a real important book to do early on in your Christianity, because it's so practical. It gives you such practical knowledge and how to get along with people and how to judge yourself. It's really a wonderful study. And I think I'm going to do James after I'm done with Romans. It's James or Hebrews.
Good.
Next question. How do you feel from chapter 1, where God said, I've put myself in you and you recognize me not. I've given you the invisible things of the world to know me and you know me not. Do you think, how valid do you think that argument for God is? Do you think that's enough? Did God do enough to make a man know him without a preacher? It's a hard question, because we can say, oh, you know, what about those countries that don't have their Bible in their language and stuff? They're not exempt from this either. God has given them a emptiness somewhere in there, as the first book says. And he says, I put myself in there and you chose to not know me. How valid is that? Do anybody have a comment on that?
Well, they always talk in Bible studies about the three lights that you get, the light of creation. Then now I can't think of what the last one's the light of Christ. In other words, if you acknowledge the light, the light of conscience, like if you see creation and you should know that it doesn't just happen by mistake. And then if you acknowledge that, God will give you the light of conscience, so to speak, where you're realizing you're right and wrong. And it's supposed to drive you to the acknowledgement of him. And if you acknowledge these things because your heart's open to him, he'll send someone to give you the light of Christ.
Perfect. So you justify God's plan is good. And through that plan, and I love the three lights, through that plan, someone can come to know Christ. Because God, we read that he says, it's in Peter, it's not my desire that any should perish, but all come to know my son. I want everyone to come to repentance through Jesus. And that's his plan. So he's done everything in his side to do. He's given you the light of creation. If you recognize it, you acknowledge it, your conscience will do something. You'll begin to seek and God will send. So I have full faith and trust that God's plan will bring everyone that is supposed to come to repentance. Do you feel that way? There's no cracks in this, that somebody could slip through the cracks. You know what? There's a scripture that says, I'll give it to you next time. Darn, where is it? Anyway, it says to the full number of the Gentiles, the full number. It doesn't say the fullness of the Gentiles. The way it reads is the full number of the Gentiles. So that means that God's counting how many people will be elected, how many people will say yes. And when that number comes, he knows it's time. The full number of Gentiles, not one person will be missed. Nobody. And when I think of that, that's like unfathomable that God knows from the beginning until the end, the number that will come to know him. And he will not do anything prematurely. And we need to trust that. So when we're praying for our loved ones that are lost, when we're praying for our neighbors that are lost, when we're praying for churches that are lost, we need to trust that it's in God's hands. And if that person is going to say yes, they have the time to say it.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we say, oh, he died and he didn't accept the Lord if he only had another week. No, God's not going to let that happen. God's not going to let that happen. If that person was not meant, God knew he's never going to accept me. Doesn't matter how much time I give him, not going to accept me. And he dies, that's not on God. It's not on God. Next question. If you were not a Christian yet, would Paul's presentation convince you that you needed a savior? These are rhetorical questions. You may not have the answer, but think about it. I skipped one. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, I don't want to miss this one. And we have a few more minutes. Listen, I want to get into the mind of the atheist, that ungodly person that says there's no God. I don't want to bother with that. What makes him tick? What do you think the attitude of that atheist is? What makes that atheist tick? Anybody?
Can you clarify more what you mean? Like, what makes atheists tick?
Well, we've read in the first chapter that these are people that God has given them a knowledge, but they have refused it. They have not had a fear of God. They don't want to listen to him. They don't want anybody telling them what to do. They are God unto themselves. And my question is, what do you think the attitude of the atheist is all about? What makes that person think like that? What would obsess a person or possess a person to refuse to recognize that that sun, the stars, the oceans stop at the seashore, that the body is the way it is, and that we can give birth to a baby? I mean, how does an atheist, what makes him think like that? This is very rhetorical. I don't know if you have an answer. They blame, Susie said, they say it's all science. Ah, no,
Science.
God, all science.
Yeah. You do trust the science, right? No.
They don't believe in anything.
There, they don't believe in anything.
Mm-mm.
So clarify that, Sonny, a little more on that. Anything, when you say they don't believe in anything. Give me some examples of other things that they don't believe in as well.
Whenever they're after life, they don't after life if there's anything. I mean, they don't believe in the hell or the heaven, and then their life end of the life is just like go back to the dirt. I mean, like nothing.
So yeah, part of it is they don't believe in anything. Thanks, Robin.
Like it,
They
like a
don't
Shiva.
believe in any afterlife. Thanks. I'm so glad you joined us, and thanks for your input, Robin. Bye. So they don't believe in any afterlife. So what are they going to lose? Just live your life, enjoy it as much as you can, and so long. I'm going back to the
Yes.
dirt.
So that's why they don't celebrate birthday. They don't donate the blood. They don't hanging out with the regular people. You know,
Yeah.
anything, nothing, zero.
It just really is astonishing as a Christian that there are people that truly, in their mind, in their heart, in their soul, account that there is no creator, no God, nothing that keeps this earth rotating on its axis.
Mm-mm.
It's amazing. Okay, next question.
Kathy.
Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
Got a quick second. I mean, to me, it's more like what you've been teaching, just that you know how you got more in depth with Romans about what the real meanings are behind the thinking of these people. I mean, to me, it goes back to the garden. I mean, the whole thing the devil was selling is the right to yourself. He wasn't selling them fruit; he's selling them autonomy. And I mean, and that's what, you know, he convinced himself of that. He convinced a third of the angels that. This is just more of his marketing campaign, that you don't, even though they may not say they believe in the devil, they believe in the story that they can be their own boss. They can make up their own right and wrong. There's no accountability to anything. And that's essentially what he sold Adam and Eve. So they're just
Absolutely.
inheritors of that thinking. That's
You're
their belief
absolutely
system.
right, Carrie. That is perfectly said, because when Satan said, God didn't really say that. And besides, God had an ulterior motive. He doesn't want you to know that stuff because he might be like him. And that's what they wanted.
Right.
It was what we discussed last week. The lust of the eyes, it looks good. The lust of the flesh, it feels good. And the pride of life, I'm going to be my own God. And that's it.
So-
That's the same thing
exactly.
that he sold then, and they're selling it and buying it today.
Right.
Will count
Amen.
to nobody for anything. And I believe we have a Congress full of those people. All right, I'm not going there anymore now. If you were not a Christian already, would Paul's presentation convince you that you needed a savior?
Depends on how hard my heart is or how much I believed in the devil's first story.
Yeah, you're right there. You're right there. For us, we would say, oh, it's very convincing, but for other people, go, that's hogwash. I'm
Right,
just
that's where the
giving
Greeks-
you food for thought. This is just food for thought. It's really amazing to us as believers that anybody could reject that truth. But if they don't believe that the word is God's word, then they say that is hogwash. Forget about it. And they continue on their way that Carrie said, and that's a God unto themselves. But now think. You sit down with somebody, a normal Joe, you know, they're not proclaimed atheists. For instance, let me say this. So my daughter told me this morning that her mother-in-law is in the hospital again, and she probably won't make it. And I said, you know, you need to get in there. Tommy needs to get in there. Tommy, her one son is a Christian, but he lives in California. And we've tried to reach her, but she's really steeped in Catholicism. And I said, somebody needs to get in there and talk to her. And she said, you know what? Her daughter, who's not a Christian either, she said to my daughter, I'm not a religious person, but I prayed to God today and said, don't let mommy suffer. What does that mean? I'm not a religious person, but I prayed to God today. So there you go. That person is not religious, but they still believe there's a God. Would that person, if they were presented with Paul's writing here, do you think that person, the non-religious, but I just said a prayer to God, think they would be convinced? Could this convince that person? The heart soft enough to say, I prayed mommy wouldn't suffer. Interesting. I'm not asking for answers. I'm just giving you food for thought, because we deal with people every day where we need to present this. And it depends, as Carrie said, on the hardness of their heart. Will you find a little soft spot that this could penetrate? Never say somebody's heart is too hard. Take the chance, like we read last week. I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, because it's the power of God unto salvation. Take the chance, share the word, share this with somebody. We never
Yes.
know.
Yeah, that is why we keep on talk about it and talk to the people, and then talk about gospel, talk about the Jesus, and then keep on chiseled down and drilling their heart, because one of the days their heart gonna be and broke it down to the little teeny pieces, and then they deserve, and then even though they say, I don't want to hear you, but because they can hear the word, it keep on bothering them. And then yes.
When they lay their head on that pillow, they keep hearing that and hearing that, and
Yes, they keep on bothering them, and then plant the seeds, and then it's gonna be grown, not grown, gonna be God's will. You know, that's what I'm
beautiful,
thinking.
Sonny. That is absolutely right. Just plant those seeds. Somebody will water it. When they put their head on the pillow, they can't get away from it. They'll be tormented.
Yes.
Yes.
Like,
Yes. So that's why we can never stop. We can never give up. We can never give up. Next question. Yes. Yeah, she's saying that she doesn't want mommy to suffer here on this earth with her illness, but she has not thought about what will happen beyond that. And if you say you're not a religious person, what does that really mean? Do you believe in a heaven and a hell? And what are you doing about it? And you're only worried about your mother. It's inconsistent. It's inconsistent. All right, next question. Discuss how you feel about the significance of how God hands sinful men over to their own lustful passions and their depraved minds. Do you think that's a fair thing that God does? I mean, we're questioning now. God's made some determinations here. What do you think about him saying, I'm going to let you just do your thing? You're on your own.
He gave us free will.
Yes. There you go. He did, and that was exposed in the garden. don't eat of this tree. And they did because they had a choice. Yes. So if he gives us free will, you know, we want that, don't we? We don't want to be little robot Christians that we have to do this and have to do that. He gave us the free will. And when they deliberately say, I'm not interested, I'm doing my own thing, I'm my own God, as Carrie put it, I'll be a God unto my own self. I think God is totally justified in allowing them to do their thing. Yeah. Here's a comment that I have written here. God is not cruel. He is righteous and just, and man is not innocent. He is sinful by nature. How can you share these thoughts? This is basically what we need to share with people, because some people think God's a mean judge, you know, and he's not cruel, he's righteous, he's just. Man is not innocent, he's sinful by nature. This is the gospel. This is what we have to share with people. How do we do that with people that look good and act good and behave well? And it's hard, isn't it?
It. Oh, I was gonna say, you know, God don't care about how you look and how much you have money, and but a man, we're looking at the man or us looking at outside, but God always looking at who you are inside of you, what you made out of it, you're crooked inside of your heart. He will punish you. You might not gonna go to heaven. He don't care how much you put your money in the church, or how much you got money in the bank, or how much you do in the social wise. It's not from your heart. It doesn't matter what you do, but you don't love him. It's from your heart. You don't have no ticket to go to heaven.
Yes.
It have to be
yes.
Yes, it have to be from the love of the God, in the name of his name, name of his name. It have to be.
Yes.